Today, I want to take a journey towards the theoretical. The reason I say theoretical is because obviously Cyberpunk 2077 hasn't been released yet. It actually just got delayed by a number of months, which was met with widespread support. But when the time inevitably comes, I speculate that it will be an enigmatic release atmosphere, which has almost nothing to do with the actual game or how good it really is, and everything to do with the pre-cemented expectations and predictions that already exist. To understand why I say this, we need to understand the cycle of industrial hype. This process is not new to gaming by any stretch. It's practically as old as the medium itself, although it has a notable increase right around the time conventions, particularly E3, became much more common. On a fundamental level, the cycle is rather simple. Hype a game, get everyone excited, spike the pre-orders and day one sales, front load the profitability, and sadly, all too often, move on to something else very soon afterward. As a side note, this is one of the reasons I am absolutely thrilled that E3 is falling apart and probably won't even be around in a few years. Get rid of it. It is useless. It's an elitist circle jerk of lies and false promotions that often tricks gamers into ordering subpar products with overinflated advertising and manipulated trailers. Anyone who genuinely posits value onto E3 is a moron. But anyways, back on topic. The money in this industry does not typically side with enduring support or content updates. Sometimes it happens. Games like Path of Exile, Warframe, now seemingly Destiny 2, though that was largely due to the split between Activision and Bungie and otherwise would not have been possible, or even Rainbow Six Siege. Games do exist that release and then continue to evolve over time. It's almost the holy grail of gaming development right now on a AAA level, with the whole as-a-service model, but more often than not it crashes and burns and they move on to something else after the massive levels of industrial hype spiked the early purchases to a point where the endeavor was already profitable. There is a reason that the top-selling games of the last 10 years list had 7 Call of Duty entries. People make jokes about that corporate meme of don't ask questions, just consume product, then get excited for next product, but it's got a lot of truth. This is born because of the industrial hype machine, and there are examples everywhere. Now, before going any further, I want to make one thing crystal clear here. I was in the room for the first reveal of Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay. I have covered the game's development cycle in the past, I will continue to do so in the future, and will 100% be playing when it comes out. I am fully aware of CD Projekt Red's track record. I absolutely loved The Witcher 3 in particular. I even have Witcher replica swords on the wall behind me, and a Cyberpunk figurine as well. This is not an assertion that I think Cyberpunk 2077 has lied about its marketing, or that it will be a bad game. This is a theoretical analysis of why whether or not it is a bad game, or a great one for that matter, either or, from a hype and reception perspective, it might not even matter. To set the stage, let's examine another high-profile AAA release from 2019. Anthem is now a historic disaster.
All those Reddit threads about how great the game is and how I am just a clickbait troll for saying it's bad, they really aged super well, didn't they?
But anyways, the industrial hype for Anthem was a whole new breed. The whole thing was a lie. This does not equal this. The marketing was a bald-faced, brutal, incompetent, even malicious lie that tricked the player base into buying a product that was unworthy, undeserving, unfinished, and a whole bunch of other descriptive adjectives which are all, without question, completely negative and also true. But even with the game being one of the worst displays of launch day inadequacy in history, there was a ravenous pack of fans that defended it without question and without critical thought. I'm not talking about the reasonable people who knew, yeah, this is a bad game, but I'm still having fun, so I get it, I'm still playing. I'm talking about the defenders, the ones who tried to claim it was actually a good product that fulfilled promises and delivered on expectations. That is the atmosphere that industrial hype breeds, for one very specific reason. To acknowledge failure on the part of the game is to acknowledge failure on the part of one's individual personal judgment. Some people call this buyer's remorse, and it is heavily tied into the theory of cognitive dissonance. The basic gist is that after purchasing a game that turns out to be hot, steaming garbage, some players endure a mental clash between expectations and reality in the face of new evidence. The new evidence being the game itself, which released and was garbage. This leads to them seeking any method possible to resolve that internal conflict. Unfortunately, the method they very often land on is to reject contradictory evidence, because accepting it would be accepting on a personal level that they were wrong. Perhaps even further, they gave bad advice to a friend or otherwise extended that judgment lapse beyond just themselves. And this unwillingness to accept personal failure leads them to reject their current reality while defending something that subconsciously they very well know is not worthy of that defense. So, how does this relate to Cyberpunk 2077? Well, Cyberpunk 2077 is probably one of the most hyped releases in history. It's hard to create a viable metric scale to actually effectively measure this hype, but I would speculate it is well and truly beyond anything we have ever seen in recent years. As an example, within hours of pre order sales going live, many months out from release, and this was even before the delay, it was a top selling game on both Steam and GOG. That's just the very early pre orders, boosting it to the #1 spot on Steam in mere hours. Over coming months, and then actually into its release window, more importantly, this game will dwarf most, if not all, of its peers with ease. And this is born from a combination of industrial hype and peer-generated enthusiasm. I'm not saying the game will be bad, so let's just get that straight before people start whining in the comment section. I actually think it's probably going to be pretty damn good based on the approach from CD Projekt Red and everything else I've seen, but the hype level for this release is through the roof. Now let's examine a different angle. There are entire YouTube channels that just cover Cyberpunk 2077 lore, leaks, and news. These are channels that literally only exist right now on the hype for this game. They even get in little feuds with each other and competing channels that also only exist covering the game, and post a 10-minute video every time the developers tweet. Now, the Cyberpunk universe is actually very interesting, so I'm not saying that their content is always bad, but they are making money and growing a following directly as a function of fanboy hype for this title. That's just the stone cold truth. Another entirely separate factor is that gamers are currently starved for quality titles in this particular area. Solid single-player open-world narrative-driven games, there's really not many. There's Outer Worlds, that's a good one, Greedfall was cool I guess, but by and large on this scale, there hasn't been and won't be anything for a very long time. This means that the audience is primed for the release like never before. They desperately want a game worth praising, the hype levels are practically breaking the scale, entire channels are already building themselves up and have been for over a year in some cases, just by promoting and swooning over this title, and it's not even out for months to come. There are certainly instances where hype has given way to animosity in the past. A great example would be No Man's Sky, but that's a unique situation because No Man's Sky, whether intentional or as a result of negligence, lied about dozens of features. Huge sections of the game just didn't exist on launch day. The trailers lied, the developers lied, in interviews, in presentations, non-stop, just lies. The game simply was not the product that was advertised, and they even got sued over it. Now, in the many months after Hello Games have put their head down and worked hard, No Man's Sky actually has tons of features now, and on some level I really have to appreciate that and commend them for it. But the point here is to illustrate how sky-high levels of industrial hype, such as with No Man's Sky, can transform into backlash. It is certainly possible. However, that was the result of failure so massive it could not be overlooked. Cyberpunk 2077, short of, just not having over 50% of what was in their trailers and gameplay so far on launch day, can't really be subjected to a similar chain of events. But that's all just one side, the hype side. Now we need to examine the opposite end of the spectrum, which is media animosity. And that section is equally, if not more, fanatical, while being just as dangerous. Cyberpunk 2077 has already been attacked and dragged in the news multiple separate times. Remember articles like this one about how it's transphobic because of a lore-conforming advertisement that actually serves as commentary on corporate greed in a dystopian future? Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. There were articles about how it's racist because the Voodoo Boys were a Haitian gang seemingly portrayed as villains in the context of a demo that was shown. The list goes on, but you will very quickly find that these attacks almost never have anything to do with the gameplay or the overarching narrative, and are almost always usually directed at either CD Projekt Red or the game itself through the lens of contemporary social issues. So let's take a step back. What do we have? We have two groups, which are the people already hyping this game like no other, sometimes making money off of promoting that hype, and this demographic has been expanding and expanding, larger than any other release I have ever seen. And then on the flip side of the coin, you have various media outlets and journalists, again, making money off of dragging the game through the mud and criticizing it over topics entirely unrelated to whether or not it is or will be a good game. There is also the less vocal, practically silent group in the middle who are actually waiting to see what happens or maintain an aura of reasonable skepticism, but this group is largely non-combative and will probably play the game for themselves, enjoy it or dislike it, and move on without ever speaking up about that experience. The vocal sections of the audience, I would speculate these sections are larger and more vocal than almost any other game we have ever seen, are entrenching themselves in predetermined and often profitable stances. One group has hyped this game to the point where if they reverse that position, they are going to look like absolute fools. And the other is already hell-bent on hating not only the game itself, but the company that built it over issues that have nothing to do with the actual experience of an average player. These two groups are going to inevitably clash time and time again, but with such dramatic opposition across the line, neither one is likely to cede ground post-release, even if ceding ground has nothing to do with joining the opposition. Even in the event they should be proven wrong, they still won't do this. Ultimately, despite Cyberpunk 2077 being one of the biggest releases in history, I think it will have some of the least meaningful gameplay in terms of how that gameplay ties into its reception. Short of the game just not functioning, it will be defended and praised by a wider base of longingly hopeful gamers, even if it turns out to be relatively disappointing compared to the current levels of hype and exaggeration. I find that to be almost inevitable at this point. The way that some of its audience members discuss the game is on par with cult worship right now. And inversely, it can be as good as the hype or beyond, and various sections of the media will attack it in the same way regardless, because for them it is profitable to do so. And the reality of what the game is has little to no bearing on their position, because most of them either never played, never intended to play, or merely played it to find social justice topics to criticize. The enigmatic nature of Cyberpunk 2077 and its pre-release hype is that it's gotten so big and its audience so adamant in their positions, it has begun to matter less and less how good the game actually is, or what choices they make. The game is locked on the rails, headed for an outcome that, at this point, seems practically inevitable, and has hardly anything to do with traditional factors. Traditional factors that should be the primary concern in these situations. But that's it. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I said, this is entirely theoretical, but I find this type of content to be fun, so I figured why not. As always, if you want to support, there are links down below, merch, Patreon, Twitter, and other social media, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.